please not click the update button on the computer, which I did 20 minutes ago, and I was a bit worried I wouldn't arrive in time. So,
So I'm just dialing Philip in. He's having trouble getting into the link, so I'm just gonna.
Right. Okay. So it's okay to all right to start there. So, yeah. Okay. Well, good morning, everybody, colleagues, governors, and members of the public. Welcome to our September public board meeting. And just to remind everyone, this is a meeting in public, not a public meeting. So questions on the content of the meeting will be welcome at the end of the meeting when we have a section for questions. It's also my very pleasant duty to welcome to their first meetings Liz Sharp, who's joined us as a non-exec director. So good morning, Liz, and welcome. And also David Luis Salado, who's joined us as Director of Development and Planning. It's also joined the executive team, and it's David's first meeting this morning as well. So welcome to you both, and hope it's the start of a long and profitable association with SECAmb. We're very pleased to see you both. Just in terms of the apologies, we've got apologies from Paul Brocklehurst, and they're duly noted. I think that's all we have, Peter. Nobody else?
Yeah, that's correct.
Otherwise, a full house. We have the minutes of the last meeting. Are you, first of all, happy they are a true and accurate record of the events? Any corrections at all to the minutes? I'll take silence as approval. Thank you. Peter, the action log, please.
Yeah, Chairman, there's just one action in the log that board members will see, and there's an update in there that that I think partially answers the question. I don't know if Debbie, do you want to, or any other colleague wants to add to what's written?
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Yeah, we will cover it in the performance section a bit later, and I think the point is about the timeline for the performance cell. So whilst we have a plan that takes us to Q2 financial year 22-23, that's far too late for us to get any significant progress there. So there is work that's underway, is the message, and we will be talking about it in more detail later in the pack.
Yeah. Thank you, and the board are aware of that and note that, Debbie. Thank you. Are there any other? That's the only action. Thank you. We're now going to move on to the board story, which is when we share a short film, and this particular film is about our booster program for the COVID vaccination, which is about to start imminently. I'm not sure, Beth, is there anything else you wanted to say at all?
Yeah, so this is actually the world premiere. We haven't shared this with staff yet, so the board have the world exclusive on this one today, because we've been waiting to be able to announce to our staff our go live, and luckily we were pushing to get that go live ready for board so that we could announce it. So our staff will be made aware later today that we will be going live on Monday next week with our vaccination program, and they'll be able to we'll do all our media comms etc around that today, and they'll be able to book flu and COVID vaccines as of today, and including everybody on this of the trust board. They'll also be eligible, of course, to do that. So I'm really pleased that we can present this video today. It will talk you through it. I would just say that it's down to a huge amount of hard work, particularly from the pharmacy team in Fiona's directorate and the COVID management team. We would not have been able to do this at all without the pharmacy expertise, because we are using the Pfizer vaccine. We're one of only 2 ambulance trusts able to deliver the booster program in-house because of the complexity of this. So we really are eternally indebted to them for their expertise with this, and I think the board should note that. It's been a huge amount of work. But no, I'm happy for the video to be played so you can see what we're going to do.
Thank you indeed.
So welcome to our West vaccination site for the Trust Autumn Vaccination Programme. The aim of this programme is to prevent serious illness and hospitalisation as we continue throughout the winter months. The programme will offer co-administration of the flu and COVID-19 booster vaccines, and you'll be able to book your vaccines via the existing PathX booking portal that we used during phases 1 and 2. On the Pathex booking portal, you'll have the options to specify whether you want the flu and COVID-19 booster vaccine or one or the other. With regards to sites that we're using, we have 2 sites for this programme. So we've got the west site based here at the SECAmb headquarters in Crawley, and then we have an east site at the East Emergency Operations Centre in Cox Heath, where we will deliver this programme from. When you arrive for your appointment at one of our 2 vaccination sites, you'll be met by one of the team who will confirm and double check the type of vaccine or vaccines that you're having and whether you want both the COVID-19 booster and flu vaccines. You'll then be asked to wait within the waiting area and will shortly be called through by one of the clinical team into your appointment.
So welcome to one of our clinics. It's come through, you'll be met by the clinic coordinator, which is one of a critical function within the vaccination programme. As you'll be invited through, you will be met by one of our vaccinators who will go through the full process from start to finish before administering one of our 2 vaccines, one being the flu and one being the Comirnaty for the COVID-19.
Welcome to the vaccine preparation area, as you can see. So we've got the 2 fridges over here at the back. We've got the green labelled fridge for the flu vaccine and the blue labelled fridge for the COVID vaccine. We've had to introduce this area as a new room for this vaccine programme because this time we are using the Pfizer-BioNTech Comirnaty vaccine. Last time we were licensed for the AstraZeneca vaccine. It's an incredibly complex vaccination. It's delivered to us at -70 degrees to our Paddockwood site, the licensed site for us to receive that, and our expert team of pharmacists oversee and supervise the storing of that. We then receive it and keep it in the blue fridge here, and we can keep it there for 31 days. We have the storage fridge temperature. We'll have to obviously check that religiously and regularly to make sure that that's kept at appropriate storage temperatures. It's more complicated than that though. A clinician then has to reconstitute the vaccine, the Comirnaty vaccine, before we can administer it. And we have to be supervised in our practice of this as well. So we've had to therefore create this additional space both here and in our EOC in Cox Heath, the East vaccination site. To further complicate things, we're co-administering the vaccine with the flu vaccine. So we have to have really rigorous safeguards in place to make sure that there's absolutely no risk with that co-administration. So after you've had your COVID vaccination, then we'll ask you to come into the COVID-19 vaccination recovery area. So this, we've repurposed our wellbeing room at West EOC, our Crawley Nexus HQ. And so you do have, there is still a requirement to wait 15 minutes after the COVID vaccination. So we will ask you to wait in here. We will have someone supervising to make sure that you don't feel any ill effects of the vaccination. That's a requirement everybody has, that we have to retain you here for 15 minutes. If you choose just to have your flu vaccination, there's no requirement to wait the 15 minutes and you're free to go as soon as you've had the vaccine.
Thank you, Beth, and that's splendid, and shows the length of the steps we're taking to keep our staff and the public we serve safe. So that's very encouraging. I did witness some of the preparations myself last week here at Crawley, and the staff are to be commended for the work they've put in. So it's a tremendous effort. Any other comments from board colleagues? So.
Fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think it's fair to say, Chris.
Good morning. Thank you very much, and well done, Bethan. I think this is an excellent film, and I think it's going to be competing with James Bond, obviously, for the Oscars. So, I mean, it's brilliantly done. And it's just a quick question. I mean, what are we doing in order to support those hesitant groups? And what measures are we taking to ensure that we increase our uptake?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Chris, and one we struggled with, of course, during the first 2 phases of the vaccination programme, and this one, of course, with flu on top. So we do have a communications plan around this. Initially, we'll be going out. So we've got 92% of our staff eligible to have this vaccine with us if they choose to do so. So we'll be, firstly, there's about the data monitoring. We'll be monitoring really closely and scrutinising and analysing who's taken up both the flu and the COVID vaccine, as we did last year, so that we can then analyse that data and target specific groups. So we do have breakdowns in terms of people with underlying health conditions, clinically vulnerable, and BAME staff members, so we can break it down by group. And we'll be looking at how we do that. And I think Janine can probably further comment on the comms element of that.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thanks, David. Yes, just to say our comms plan builds on some of the both the lessons and what worked well for us previously. So we worked quite closely previously with members of various staff networks to use their members to try and encourage network members and others to have the vaccines. We were very mindful of a broad approach in our visual comms to try and encourage people forward. I know the COVID team, Bethan, spent a lot of time having individual conversations with those who may be hesitant for whatever reason to have the vaccine, spent a lot of time on a one-to-one basis talking through some of the issues. So we'll be looking to as well as all our general comms, also incorporate some of those particular approaches that we used last time, as well as using any national resources. I don't think we have seen quite the same availability of national comms resources that we saw last time. I haven't seen anything yet, but we have a lot in-house that we've developed and we'll be looking to roll out from today.
Thank you. Final words to the Chief Executive. Philip? You're on mute, Philip.
I'm going to give the final word to Bethan because, Bethan, do you want to say something about whether when staff are offered, as they were last time, the booster in a different care setting, and what our approach is to that, because that caused a bit of kerfuffle last time? You're on mute. Bethan.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Of course, yeah, our approach around the booster vaccine and the flu vaccinations, if you get offered it elsewhere, absolutely great, you know, and particularly if it's closer to your home from travelling, that's fantastic. Feel free to take up that offer anywhere. The only thing we ask is that you let us know, because then that will help us not pester you, target you as to whether or not you've had it, etc. And it will really help us understand how the system is working. So people are completely at will to get it wherever they like. We just would like to know about it, and that's in our comms as well, that will go out how they let us know.
And in fact, some staff have already had it.
They have, yeah.
Because we know that, because some of them have been on our sickness lists for vaccine after effects.
Okay, well, thank you. We know with pride then the work that we've done today through you, Bethan. Can we thank all the staff involved in getting ourselves prepared, and particularly demonstrating how we care for our staff, because it is important that they're feeling as safe as they can in what's currently a very challenging situation for them in the workplace. So thank you indeed. Before we move on to the Chair's report, can I ask colleagues to note the declarations of interest report that's in the paper? Hopefully that's now up to date. It's very important that we demonstrate high standards in public life here in SECAmb. So that declares any interest which directors of the organisation have. So just in case the people feel there's any conflict of interests, they can see we're being completely open with our business. So please note that, and that goes on the public records and in our various reports which are published each year. And please update it. It will be updated through the year as information is shared. So thank you for that. If I can now move on to item 3021, which is the Chair's report, which is effectively just to introduce the business of the meeting today. And colleagues will know, and certainly the papers demonstrate, that our teams have continued to experience significant challenges in being able to consistently respond in a timely way to the needs of our patients. Although as a board we remain deeply concerned about this, I'm absolutely confident that the executive and the wider SECAmb team is doing all they reasonably can in extremely difficult circumstances to provide as safe a service as possible to the wider public. All parts of the urgent and emergency care system in the NHS are currently working under extreme pressure, and our work, and we reflect that in SECAmb. Through the board and its committees, we've got good oversight of the immediate steps which have been taken forward, and on the agenda for this meeting we'll hear about the current areas of focus, and particularly what it demonstrates that we're not operating in isolation and we're operating as a true partner of the wider health and social care system. Please, I also ask the public to note how we spent time in our development session in August, exploring the more medium to long-term plans, and as a board we give equal energy here, so particularly in these papers, to the role we find, to ensure that we find strategic solutions to the challenges we face. It's easy to be consumed by the operational challenges of the day. That's our business, that's what we do extremely well, but I think it's important that the wider public and our governors acknowledge that we are also looking to the future and trying to plan in difficult circumstances for to take SECAmb forward and keep developing our services to the benefit of patients and our staff. And you'll see examples how we are currently adapting our operating model, and we refer in the meeting to the programme of Better by Design, which will help to achieve a more efficient and effective service going forward. And we're going to be spending more time as a board in October in going into more detail of that so we truly understand what we're doing, to ensure the message is clear to our staff that this is about improving the services and this is not about cost cutting. The board's meeting also focuses on our duty relating to diversity and inclusion, and it's particularly important to note that October is Black History Month, and within the NHS and SECAmb we will be hosting a number of events, and indeed Asmina, who's our Equality and Diversity and Inclusion lead, is also leading a national conference on this particular subject. And again, we will come back to that in the course of the meeting, but also there are a number of each week in October will be a particular theme relating to this very important subject. And I'm also summarising, I've also in the report just referred to some meetings I've attended on behalf of SECAmb with national leaders, both with the NHS England, but also informing the Prime Minister's health advisors with our colleagues from the wider ambulance sector. And I think in summary, whilst we remain under pressure and we have to be realistic, we are under scrutiny for sure in terms of our performance, I think it's fair to say that I've never heard so much understanding and respect towards the ambulance services from national leaders in my time as chair, but also in my previous experience in the NHS. So I think it's fair to say we have people's attention. People recognise the excellent work which ambulance services are doing throughout the NHS, particularly in managing the flow of patients through the urgent and emergency care system, and particularly through our 111 services. So we have understanding, that's for sure. But I think we must also be realistic. We are in the public eye, and we need to acknowledge that we have to do all we can to continue to bear down on poor performance where appropriate, look at ways of improving our services, just recognise we are here to serve the public and we are going to be questioned for what we do. However, I think in terms of setting the tone for the discussions today at the board, I think it is important we note the respect in which ambulance services are being held in the NHS, particularly by our partners, but also by the political process. Nevertheless, that brings greater pressure on us to make sure we're doing all we can to serve the public of the South East of England. So I hope that just summarises the key things we need to tackle in the meeting. We're not alone in our challenges, but we also have to recognise we're accountable also for our performance. We need to demonstrate that. So we can move on, please, to item 3121, which is the risk group, the BAF risk report. Peter.
Thank you, Chairman. So usual format, the board's now really familiar with, so I won't go through the detail of it. In a couple of comments, really. In some ways, I think section 3 of the report is the most important part, as this illustrates the extent to which there is oversight of the key risks through the board that the board has sight of, either through their board meetings or via one of its committees. The report therefore is aimed at providing assurance to the board that the principal risks are firstly identified and then that they're being managed. As we'll go through today's agenda, I think we'll find most, if not all of the risks will be covered through the items. And then in part 2, We'll be working through some of the emerging thinking and how we align the elements of the strategic delivery plan. And then from that, formal reports will come to the board in part 1 from November. And the aim will be to overlay this BAF risk report with that strategic delivery plan, because obviously both are aligned. So, Chairman, that's all I wanted to say, just by way of introduction. And if there are any specific questions about any of the risks that are listed.
Board, I think there is one question. Michael.
Yeah, I think it's a good risk register, Peter. One thing I think we asked as a board to put a time horizon on some of these risks, which you've done, which is great. There are a number of risks there that have got, I think, the date, unless I've misread it, August, it goes into 2023. I think it's important that we recognise that that is our earliest estimate of when that is. That our earliest estimate of when that risk will be managed and mitigated, because if it is, it's quite a long way ahead. And I know we review it at every board, but I think there's something about looking a little bit more, giving a bit more around that time horizon.
Yeah. So just in terms of the timeframes that listed in the report, that's the I think the earliest estimation in terms of when the risk score, the target risk score, is likely to be achieved, which is different to saying that the risk can't be mitigated in the meantime. But I take the point, and I think the challenge, Michael, is is that challenging enough timescale? Yeah,
that's fine. I think that's all I would say for members of the public looking at this, that we recognise the risk, we are seeking to mitigate it, and we're not slow in moving this forward as quickly as we can.
Well, if I may, that's a very good point. Thank you for raising that. We'll clearly review it at key milestones in relation to managing these risks. But also, I think it's important that we are honest with ourselves and with the public that these are complex issues and are not going to be resolved quickly. We can take mitigating steps, as you say, but I think we need to be realistic. But that being said, as a board, we will obviously continue to challenge the timetables and to make sure that we're doing the best we can and using all of our resources to clearly these are our key risks and we need to make sure we are managing them. So, board, are you content that as we start the meeting, that the BAF, the board assurance framework, accurately records the risks we foresee at the moment? It may change towards the end of the meeting, but as we start the meeting, you're happy that summarises where we stand as an organisation. Okay, thank you. That's important to note that. Can we now move on to the Chief Executive's report? Philip.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I also want to start by welcoming, firstly, David, or David, as we're calling him, because otherwise half of the board are called David. And I'm delighted with the way that David has settled in so quickly. And you'll hear bits from him today which illustrate that. But this is a long-term investment in us as a board, bringing in individuals like David, and we need to invest long-term in him, and we plan to do that. So welcome to David, and also welcome to Liz, who will with her experience be able to give us really good not only challenge, but also the sharing of expertise, and we look forward to working with you over 1 or 2 terms as you choose, Liz. So welcome. I'm going to start my report. I won't go through the report as it's written. I'll assume that everyone's read it, and I'm just going to give a brief update on the national picture. So across the ambulance service, for the first time ever, all the UK's ambulance services are in REAP 4. That hasn't happened before, and it is just an illustration of the effect that not only the year and a half of working on COVID, but also the way in which the public demand has changed. That has meant that all of the ambulance services across the country are having to adjust quite considerably to that what is looking like a new normal, at least in the short term. So we see this new normal going on for some time. It's not 2 weeks, it's not 3 weeks. It's probably it's this sort of pressure until the early spring. So we are doing things about it, but there is that pressure that's across the piece. And Emma will talk to you more about where we sit with within our national colleagues and as a trust, how we're doing and what we're doing about it. But that's the sort of national ambulance picture. And if you look around the health systems, and now I'm going to come a bit more local. So three of our 4 ICSs are in their version of REAP 4, which is Opal. And they are also feeling significant pressure. Partially this is because of difficulties with fuel, but that's abating. But it is the whole of the system is suffering the same problems as the ambulance service, and it's not only in NHS; it's in in the social care sector. Which are also facing significant problems, which is slowing the flow of patients across the entire system, which of course has an effect on us when we're trying to get people into the front door. In terms of SECAmb, the basic problem is the imbalance between supply and demand. So it isn't that specific bits of demand have gone up massively, but when you balance that with the increased abstraction of staff that we face, that we're not able to produce enough staff on a daily basis in order to meet the demand that is there and is relatively variable. But there are some green shoots. The forward look is looking better than it did this time a month ago, and also when we last sat as a board, and that's because the rate of sickness is abating in some places, and also the rate of COVID abstraction has gone down a bit. It was running up to 250 at a day. We're now running at just over 100. Now, the risk of the vaccine program that Bethan was just telling us about is that will go up again, because we did see short-term sickness go up when we vaccinated the first time. We expect that to be a factor. So that might take away the advantage that I was just talking about, and the fact that there are green shoots. Our call answer performance is particularly challenged, and we have done a lot to work on that in the very short term. And there are new courses of staff who will start coming out into the business quite shortly, which will reinforce the ability of us to make sure that really, really important element of our service gets back into something that we can be sure is safe. Because for the last couple of months, I'm not sure that it's been as good as we would. I know it's not been as good as we would want it to be, but action has been taken, and that's in train. So I'm not going to talk about that anymore. We'll move. I'm pleased to say that we are, even though the whole trust is focused on performance, and quite rightly when it's this challenged, we have managed to keep a lot of the normal business of running a trust going. Looking towards the future, we talked about better by design, and how we're now coming, and we'll be talking later in part 2 about how we are going to use better by design as the vehicle to deliver the trust strategy. So that will make everything much clearer, and people will be able to follow that much more closely, and so that I believe is a good thing. But we'll have more conversation about that later. For the present and the short term, Work continues apace on our estates, with both Medway and Banstead making good progress. We have, over the last month or so, signed off some new vehicle procurements, and this is not to increase our vehicle numbers, but we are continuing the programme of replacing older vehicles with newer vehicles, so to give the patient and our staff, importantly, a better working environment than they've had before. So that continues, and I know that I was also very pleased by the way in which the annual members meeting went, which was in between the last meeting as we come. In terms of what's going on for staff, I was pleased to see the bit in the report about a prison sentence for someone who has abused our 111 service. It is really important for all of our people to see that when members of the public do something wrong, such as that, and it was serious, it was very serious, that the courts take the right attitude. So I was very pleased to see a prison sentence for something that doesn't normally attract prison sentences. I'm delighted that the staff awards are going ahead. We were going to, we had planned to do it all in person, but we have had to make a slight revision of that because of the rise in COVID numbers. So we've cut back the numbers of people who are going to attend so that we can do it more safely, and we've got a range of other IPC measures in place. And a lot of the people who are winning commendations will do so via video link rather than in person, and that's how we've managed to make the events safe. So I'm delighted that they're going ahead, and the first one of those is next Thursday. People will have be very aware about the problems with fuel supply. I mentioned it in the report at the time of writing. It was all over the press. It remains so. The only thing I'm going to say is that we have good plans in place to make sure that we have resilience for our frontline operations. So I am not worried about our ability to run our frontline operations because of fuel. We have the plans in place to make sure that that is not a problem. There has been a problem for some individuals getting petrol in order to get to work, but actually that's been relatively minor as well. And it hasn't been a significant factor, and it does look like it's beginning to wane as an issue, but we will keep an eye on that, and we will make sure that our staff are able to provide the service that our patients deserve. And then lastly, I just wanted to note that in between the last two meetings, we had Emergency Services Day, and Charlie Spears, along with colleagues in the Fire and Rescue Service and the patients in which they saved, were presented to the Royal Foundation and spent a day with the Duke of Cambridge. And I just wanted to report, there are things like Charlie's going on every day. So despite the fact that we are struggling with performance, the time-based performance, when our staff do get to patients, they are still doing wonderful things every day. And I'm really encouraged by the fact that I'm still getting more thank you letters from people than I am getting complaints about how long we're taking to get there. So I leave with that, Chair, and I'll open for questions.
Thank you. Yes, I was also very touched to receive a letter from a NHS colleague because of the compassionate care our crews have given to their mother, and that was quite humbling to read the comments. So I echo what you're saying there. Thank you. So, colleagues, any questions or comments on the Chief Executive's report? Howard.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Philip. It was good to see this prison sentence for this nuisance caller. The question I had on this is how and who identified the multiple caller, And obviously the follow-on question is there anything we can do to improve the speed with which we identify such a caller in the future? Because I mean, 1,263 calls was a massive disruption for us, presumably. Maybe it's a technical question, but can we identify multiple callers or multiple calls from the same place at an earlier stage, if that's possible, just to prevent it happening in the future?
Thanks, Howard. It's a good question. We do have a frequent caller team. So this is a team of people who are dedicated to frequent callers. They're mostly for those people who are genuine callers as opposed to prank callers like this, and so their role is to identify the the people who call most frequently to our services, and then to put in a medical plan with their GP and with their local services so that they don't need to call so often. But also so that when they do call, we can deal with them more quickly. So that's those folk who are genuine callers. When it's someone like this, it's much more difficult because this person was phoning up in different characters, different persona, and so that's not something that we experience every day, I'm glad to say, but also it's harder to spot. But it is down to the members of staff in the call centres by communicating with each other to establish patterns. But I'll let I noticed that Janine's hand's gone up, and she wants to say something about this, and then I might see if Emma has anything to add.
Philip's covered some of it, Howard. Just to say, this came to light due to the fact that we were receiving complaints from members of the public who had not called us, and we were turning up thinking they needed our help because this individual had given their name and address. So when you start to get repeated episodes of that, in some cases this resulted in 999 crews breaking into people's houses in the middle of the night because we believed they needed our help and didn't. So that's how alarm bells started to be raised a little bit, and then obviously further investigations took place. But just to add to what Philip said, not only was this individual using different personas and different voices, etc., he was also calling from different numbers. So it wasn't a case of simply that single number kept triggering. He was coming from one of a number of different numbers, as well as giving different names and addresses. So as Philip said, a complicated case, and one that was quite difficult to unpick, and which took a considerable period of time to do so because of how complex it was.
Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you. I don't think I've got anything further to add. I think you and Janine have covered it all.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Laurie's hand up, Chair.
Okay, shall I go? Philip, thank you. A smashing report. The slightly scary thing in it really is this sort of surge in public demand for our services, which in a sense, we can't manage how the public use us. So I was just wondering whether others in the system, particularly around DH and the NHS executive, are trying to manage the demand that we face, or at least to flow patients around the system differently, either through communicating directly with the public or trying to ensure that there's some kind of availability of alternative services and decent access to them. I mean, we just seem to be at the sort of the sump of all of the failures of the system seem to arrive with us. And I just wondered what efforts perhaps nationally or certainly regionally are being made to redirect those flows.
Yeah, thank you. Laurie said that it is a good point, but I'm not sure. So when we first started to see the additional demand, and the hospitals started to see additional demand, there was initially a theory that this was all about other parts of the system who were not being as effective as they used to be because they weren't seeing people face to face and that sort of stuff. Actually, that has proved not to be the case.
Okay.
And actually, all parts of the system are seeing more patients than they have before. So yes, there has been efforts, and I'm really indebted to our ICS, the ICSs that we support, because they've been helping with those efforts about making sure that people use the most appropriate point of care rather than just going to 999. And of course, they're one of the answers to that is go to 111, which is why the 111 numbers are so high. But yes, there has been real effort to do it, but there isn't anybody who is sitting there with their hands crossed waiting for patients across the entire system. The hospitals are fuller than they've ever been. They're saying so. Our local, one of the closest hospitals to here, SASH, normally runs at 300 patients a day. They're running at 400 patients a day in their ED every day, and have been for this considerable period. So it's a health service wide and also care service wide problem.
Yeah, and it goes back to David's point about perhaps not finger pointing at other bits in the system. I just wonder, on the comms side of the public, do you think there's any merit in the centre trying to communicate with the public just to try and hold back that demand? Or I've not seen any evidence of anyone trying to do that.
Well, there has been bits, but it's focused. Janine, I don't know whether you want to add to that.
I think we're still in the.
No, you're not.
I think we're still in the position, Laurie, where I would say carefully there isn't a great deal of willingness at the centre to necessarily be as open as we may like with the pressures we're under. So I think that has improved a bit over the past. I think, Philip, you've seen that at a chief exec level over the past couple of months. There has been some movement in that, but I don't think we are yet in that position where there is that willingness to put it out there, as it were, in quite that way. I also think, if I'm honest, it's very difficult because there isn't an easy option to point people towards when we're seeing the pressures that 111 are under, when a lot of the community services and minor injury units are struggling to staff themselves. Some of the traditional alternatives that we would point people to away from 999 are struggling themselves too. So I think that's a factor as well. I think also we're in the period now where we have had months of telling the public how busy we are, and to look for alternatives, to not use our services, to contact GPs, etc. And it starts to become wallpaper and lose its impact. So I'm hoping we may see a refreshed approach to winter and some direction nationally, but I'm not sure if we will, if I'm honest.
Thank you, Janine. That's very clear, and we all know the problems. What happens when you say don't panic?
Yeah, we're just seeing it with fuel, aren't we?
Yeah, thank you. That's right. Yeah, that's what I was leading to. Thanks.
David, you're on mute.
Thank you. Trying to be professional there. I will just to take on Janine's comments. What I will do on behalf of the board, I will communicate with our regional director in terms of the board's wish that we do need some openness here to make sure that our staff are supported and the public do understand the pressures, because we've got to manage the interface when things don't go as well as we would like, particularly when there's been delays. So on behalf of the organisation, I will raise that matter in a note to Annie, our regional director, just to say that we would like to participate in some wider public information campaign in order to, as we plan for winter. We're going to come on to winter plan in a minute, so I'd like to move this item on fairly quickly if we may, just so we can get into that detail. Michael?
Yeah, very quickly. Thank you, Chair. Philip, I'm just interested. There's a lot in the media about obviously the backlog that the NHS is facing. So the impact on our demand, are we affected by that? I'm assuming that we're not, but are we affected by it?
So there are two ways in which an ambulance service can be affected. One is by increasing the numbers of patients, and the other one is by having an increase in acuity. So at the moment, I would say that our demand is not too far above what it would normally be at this time of year. It's slightly up, but not significant. But we have far more people in Cat 1 and 2 than we would expect to have at this time of year, and so there is definitely now. There's definitely been an effect in that sense.
And perhaps, Emma, you can pick that up in your report next in terms of the case mix of patients we're currently dealing with, because I'm sure that must have an impact on performance. Any other questions from board colleagues? Any other hands raised? I can't see any more. Okay, thank you. So, well, thank you for a very comprehensive report, Philip. But we take some actions in terms of just communicating the board's wish around a wider public information campaign, and we assume that's normally part of NHS winter planning. So we need to check that is in hand, because I think it's important we are open with the public, and our staff see us being open as well. We note the other aspects of your report. Thank you for that. Can I move us on to say a really important issue this morning, hearing from Emma, our Director of Operations, on the operational performance improvement plan and also the winter plan, which we've just touched on in the previous item. So Emma, good morning, and over to you.
Good morning, thank you, Chair. So I'll start by just providing a little bit of context, just building on some of the update that Philip provided. Obviously, he explained that all ambulance services are in REAP 4, and I think the important thing to note with that is that actually at this point in August, every single English ambulance service missed all of the performance targets. So that'd be from call answering all the way through to C4. So as a national average, and for those individuals trusts, it was read across the board. That's a very significant place, somewhere we've not been before, and I think really indicates the pressure that everyone is under across the board at meeting those targets. In terms of our performance, we recognise that we still have obviously some work to do. Our call answering we've spoken about previously is a real challenge at the moment. Our C1s and C3s and 4s also outside the target we'd like to be, and unfortunately in the lower proportion of the table, whereas our C2s we've been pretty consistent and remain in the top third. I think picking up your point, Chair, around the proportion, I'll just give a bit of a flavour of what that actually means for us. So if we think about our C2s, when we started this financial year, our C2s were about 53–54% of the calls that we received, with C1s being approximately 6.5% to just under 7%. Last week we saw our C2s at 62% and our C1s at 8%. So I think that indicates that we are seeing a higher proportion of higher acuity calls. Now, we do recognise, Chair, that with the duplications and some of the delays that people are seeing, that a call may come in at a lower acuity and end up as a result of the wait at a slightly higher acuity, but that isn't the full rationale for us seeing an increase, particularly, as I said, for those C2s to go from 54% to 62%, because that really is quite a significant change in the acuity. We know that hospitals are also reporting a higher acuity, which some of that is due to patients having to wait longer over the last 12 months for ongoing care and trying to manage as best as they can in the community, but it's taken a toll, I think, on lots of people. So I think just recognising those performance positions. The question is, so what are we doing about it? REAP4 obviously has very specific actions relating to it, and we're implementing those actions to ensure that we are optimising all our resources on the front line to get to our patients, to get to them in as timely fashion as we can, and deliver the best care we can. Also on day, we use our surge management plan, which allows us to enact specific actions dependent on the in-hour or on-moment demand. And what we have seen in a positive way in the last couple of weeks is that we begin to see a very small reduction in the amount of time spent at the highest levels of surge. We're still seeing it, but actually there are a small amount of green shoots that we're beginning to see a little bit less than we have previously. When we escalate through those levels of surge, it's all about clinical risk and risk management and doing the best we can to support those patients through enhanced hear and treat, trying to get more clinicians to make contact, doing welfare calls, and really trying to risk stratify those patients to get to the sickest as quickly as we can. I will come on to a couple of other pieces around some additional monies that we've got for winter, and I'll pick those up shortly, Chair, in the performance improvement plan. But just to recognise that we are in a situation where we have been given some additional money from central government, which is to bolster our resources and our support for service delivery in Q3 and Q4 of this year. I think the final thing I'll just talk about before I move on to the performance improvement plan is around our what we call our abstractions. So those staff who, for a range of reasons, aren't undertaking active shifts. Now, some of that is completely expected through annual leave, for example, through sickness. And as Philip has described, we have seen a small reduction in some areas of sickness, but this remains a very significant challenge for us, because we are seeing still remaining high levels of sickness, high levels of annual leave, and part of this is directly related to the welfare of staff. People are taking their annual leave. They've got more annual leave this year because they've carried more over, and that was part of a national directive to allow staff to carry over more annual leave from last year, and people have been taking it, which is absolutely the right thing to do, and they have been coming in smaller numbers to do some additional overtime. So I think that has all constituted a position where our resource hours have been very challenged. Last board, I explained a similar position. We are seeing some increases in overall resource hours, particularly in the last couple of weeks, which is positive, and we will continue to monitor and work on this. Chair, I've got a couple of slides that I'd like to show. I apologise for not circulating before the meeting, but I will happily share them afterwards. It's very much just a summary of the next steps of the performance improvement plan. So if you're happy, I'll just put them on the screen now and just briefly walk you through them, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So just to pick up on the performance improvement plan, phase 1, which you're aware of, was from May to August. Since then, we've been monitoring and maintaining the plan whilst we've moved ourselves towards phase 2. It's really about building the successes and learnings from that phase 1, recognising there were a range of different metrics in phase 1 that we felt that the right thing to do was to have slightly fewer, but have some more targeted actions associated with them. There were also some actions in phase 1 that weren't specifically within our sphere of ownership. So by that, I particularly am relating to hospital handover times. So we've agreed that that won't go into the next plan as a specific action for us, but it is a very important piece of work that we've been discussing with commissioners, how we support that work and do it in conjunction with our partners. Phase 2 of the performance improvement plan will also include 3 additional components. So this will be not only the national ambulance funding for Q3 and 4, but building on the C3 and C4 revalidation pilot for 999 calls that's been a success over the summer. The pilot phase itself has now completed, but we have agreed our next steps and how we would like to continue and enhance this further, also recognising that the pilot is whilst it was trialled in 3 ambulance sites, all ambulance services are now looking to roll it out. If I can just comment on the national funding, as I said, this was money that was a central pot. We were allocated a proportion of 4.3 million to focus on Q3, Q4 activity to drive improvements in performance. We've submitted trajectories associated with that, which are about improving performance, and there are very robust plans that sit underneath it. 2/3 of that amount of money is going specifically into the Emergency Operations Centre to provide additional capacity within the call handling and clinical components of that area, so we can absolutely ensure that we get answering those calls from patients in a much more timely manner, but also we're able to do really good call support with clinicians doing hear and treat. And this is really important for us to expand that area to be able to use our frontline vehicles and crews more effectively, but also to support some of the structural work that sits with Better by Design that was alluded to earlier. I think the final part that we're also including in the plan is relating to conveyance and handovers at destinations other than emergency departments. This very much links in with our system partnership working and really trying to optimise those pathways for patients to get definitive care in locations other than emergency departments. We recognise that a number of ICSs have put a lot of focus into this, where they have urgent care centres and walk-in centres, for example, and there's a lot of focus at the moment around same-day urgent care and emergency care as well. So really trying to engage with that. The key themes, they stick with resourcing efficiencies and outcomes, and I think but I wanted to make a list here, Chair, so that you could see the actions that we've taken from phase 1 and the changes that we've made to in phase 2, so the new actions that you can see that are identified there. These also, as I say, cross-link with the additional winter monies and work that we're discussing through Better by Design to ensure that we're really trying to have a synchronous plan that suits and fits all strategic intentions across the trust and across the region. Next steps, we've finished doing this piece of work now. It goes live on the 1st. There is a new dashboard being created with support from PMO individuals, and that there is an additional level of oversight for this because we will be needing to report on a weekly basis to NHSE on relation to our performance against the trajectories associated with the Q3 and 4 funding, and have actually already started that reporting, particularly in relation to the recruitment, the additional recruitment for emergency medical advisors, EMAs, and within our EOCs. So that will be an additional layer of oversight for that. We are doing weekly performance meetings with SMG and EMB, of which these actions will be part of, and we will be linking with programme boards, for example, the Better by Design one, that these are all key components of as well. So, Chair, that's my update around the performance improvement plan itself, and the current performance position we're in, really recognising that everybody is working very hard to do the best that they can at this point in time for our patients, to try and maintain safety and welfare of our staff, and to try and ensure that we are resilient and trying to meet the best that we can for our service delivery and working with our partners. Would you like to take a break at this point before I go on to the winter plan?
Please, if I may, and can I,
yes, of course,
just to make sure we don't get into an outbreak of acronyms, just for those new into the meeting, REAP stands for Resource Escalation Action Plan. That's our level of preparation for when we are in difficult times. So we're at the highest level of that. So it's a national standard that's applied to all ambulance services. And perhaps, Isabella, if I can ask you, if you hear an acronym and it's then not qualified, would you mind putting it in the chat what it stands for, given we've got new colleagues on the meeting this morning, and we may have some members of the public as well, so make sure they understand. And then can I ask you, before I open to questions, for the benefit of those new to the meeting, the validation pilot, the category 3 and 4, could you quickly summarise what that is, please?
Yes, of course, Chair. So it started off in 111. This was where calls came through and were identified as a C3 or a C4 call. So technically the lower acuity calls. And the challenge was, rather than automatically dispatching on them, would it be better to have a clinical intervention and have a clinician have a conversation with that patient to understand if there was a more appropriate destination that we could direct them to, or whether it could be handled through advice and over the phone. So that started in 111. It was very successful, and the decision was by the Association of Ambulance Chief Execs that they would do a programme working with NHSE and the National Ambulance Advisor to explore whether we could do a similar validation for calls that come through to the 999 service, recognising that the response times for C3s and C4s are in the hours, i.e. 1 to 2 hours, rather than the minutes. So that was a pilot that ran for 12 weeks, finishing last month, end of last month. It's being nationally validated, but it was very much about doing the right thing for patients, and if it meant that we could provide the right advice and direction over the phone by a clinician, then that was the right outcome for them as first step. Thank you.
It also deals with one of the key major feedback we have from our staff. It means that the calls that are being sent to are increasingly more relevant and less frustrating when those calls are managed. So it's good. And also, just again for the board, colleagues, the performance committee of the board also monitors closely the performance and all the issues in the plan that Emma is talking about. So first question from Michael.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Emma, as ever, a very insightful performance and fully recognise all the hard work that your teams are doing. I've got two questions, really. I was interested in the point that you and Philip made about the increase in acuity of cases. So given our resourcing position, are we assured that we have got that, I'm assuming that the higher acuity, the higher, more greatly skilled the ambulance, the emergency services team have to be. Are we confident that we can actually respond to that in terms of the appropriate level of skills for patient safety and a successful outcome? That's my first question. And my second question, to help you think about this, I am conscious, and people will know, that we do have resources to increase our complement of paramedics. This is ongoing all the time, and I'm interested over the next 6 months, what level of increase in staff numbers might be coming into SECAmb and how quickly they are, operationally ready to support our colleagues.
Thank you. So answering your first question, I think it's important to recognise that we have a well-trained workforce. We have a significant proportion of our staff are paramedics, and say the majority of vehicles that we put out there do have either a highly experienced ambulance technician or a paramedic on them. They are all competent to deal with all of the acuity of calls. The challenge arises with acuity at the very highest level, particularly the C1s, is often we would look at not sending a single resource. We would send multiple resources, whether that be an OTL, an operational team leader, or whether it be a critical care paramedic, because this is about having more hands. When someone is critically unwell, it's often not the fact that you can't decide what's going on, it's the fact that there's so much going on. It's having enough people to be able to do the hands-on piece, to not only provide the care, but also do the preparation to move them and get them moved. So so overall, I believe we have a fully qualified workforce. The CCPs also provide a very good service at providing support over the telephone, and that crews can reach out for advice, as they can to our paramedic practitioners as well. So I am confident in the skill levels that we have to provide care to these acuity of patients. The challenge around the number of paramedics, I think, is always going to be there, because the paramedics in the current health economy are a really marketable commodity, and we are struggling to get to our intention of where we originally said we'd wanted to be in terms of the proportion of paramedic workforce. However, we are recruiting at pace, and in fact only 2 weeks ago I went to Haywards Heath, the college there, for the end of transition to practice, and met about 30 new NQPs who've just come out and have just finished finish their 2 weeks familiarisation to get them ready to come and join us on the road. So that pipeline is still hot. It is working well. We have very good relationships with the universities that we work with, and we have the University of Cumbria course as well, and we have Crawley College. So I think we have as much as we can at this point in time, knowing also the universities have increased their intake this year for paramedics. But I think it's always going to be a challenge, Michael, to get that skill mix as high as we want. But in terms of vacancies themselves, we're in a pretty good position for frontline ops in terms of total numbers of staff.
Okay, thank you. In terms of assurance and transparency to the public, I really appreciate all that SECAmb is doing. I think it would be useful to have a note or something come to the board that would show what our supply pipeline is. Yep. You know, I'm interested to know by December, is it an increase of 10%, 20%, and similarly over the next couple of years. Please, I'm not trying to in any way say you haven't secured it. I appreciate how difficult it is, but I think it's important for members of the public to see that we are actively trying to get more people into the workforce. Thank you, but they're very good explanations. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll make sure that we bring some information to the next board, Michael.
Thank you.
And we clearly the workforce committee will also ensure will monitor that pipeline. But just to say, Subo and I were meeting frontline staff in Brighton this week, where at our new Make Ready Centre. And what was very pleasing was to hear some very positive feedback from staff regarding the changes which taken place in the education department, and I think I was very pleased to hear that in terms of the revised leadership, and that gives us some heart in terms of ensuring this pipeline continues to flow, and staff are encouraged to keep developing in SECAmb. So thank you for those points, Emma. Tom, next question.
Thanks very much, David. Yes, I just reiterate everything you've just said about what we're hearing about clinical education. Subo and I, of course, went down to Haywards Heath last week and were very impressed. And I note that universities are getting lots and lots and lots of new undergraduate paramedic students. So I think one of them last night I was hearing has 80 in this year's cohort. You know, this is going to take time. The pipeline takes time, but you know we're going to realise our ambitions at some point. My question, though, Emma, sorry, is really back to the category 3, category 4 pilot. So the NHS is very good at doing pilot studies. Is there going to be any sort of formal report of that we can see as a board, have a think about, and sort of it'll help inform the next steps for our organisation?
So there is a formal evaluation being done. Forgive me, I forget the university, but there is a university that has been commissioned directly to do a full academic evaluation of the pilot. The challenge, of course, with that, Tom, was that is not going to be a quick turnaround. That's probably going to be months in order to complete the work and then get it approved for publication. Sheffield, thank you, Fiona. So I think the reality we need to recognise is throughout the pilot there were weekly touch points with all the key players, including governance, oversight and safety. At no point was the pilot identified to have significant safety issues that would stop it happening, and this was across the 3 sites. So there was a live review and governance and oversight, which has allowed us all to be able to say we think we should continue, and recognising that the other trusts that weren't part of the pilot are now implementing the pilot actions because of the success and the safety of them and the benefits to the patients that it was perceived that it's brought. So yes, there will be a publication, but it's being done through an academic route, which my assumption will be is probably going to be the middle of next year, I would have thought, before we see it fully published.
Great, thanks very much for that. Yes, that's useful to know. And of course, we will keep an eye as it proceeds with implementation within our trust. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Subo?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Emma, for that report. Very comprehensive, as always. Just a quick question. You mentioned about the National Ambulance Service funding, and you said that you were looking at increasing the recruitment into the EOC and the 111 service, and that is ongoing at the moment. And I noticed it's mentioned elsewhere. Can you give us an update on how that is going? Because I think the public probably would be quite interested in knowing how quickly we can get these people in terms of, call handling on the 111 and EOC services. Can you give us an idea of timescales and how that's going?
I apologise. I apologise. I think my Wi-Fi just dropped momentarily, so I missed your question, Zubo.
It was so blinding, that's it, your Wi-Fi just dropped out because of it. What I was asking was about the National Ambulance funding. So we talked about increasing the number of people who are going to do the call handling in the 111 and EOC. And you said that the recruitment is ongoing. So I was just wondering, really, for members of the public, how that recruitment is going, how quickly we might get them in and meet our targets. And it may not be a question for you, maybe a question for Ali. I know you're doing it together, but I know it's mentioned in other reports. So I thought it'd be quite useful just to hear the update now.
Very important.
Yes, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And just to clarify, and it may have been that I wasn't as clear, the 4.3 is specifically for 999. It's not part of the 111 because there's been separate funding through that. So we are fortunate that we have a rolling program of training because training to answer a call is not a quick program. It takes a number of weeks, and then there's further mentoring. So we have a program that has allowed us to step up in terms of volume and pace to do it. We actually have the first cohort of new trainees coming out next week. So we had some in the pipeline already, and we have those courses planned through the rest of the year. So we are in a positive position from that, and recruitment is in a good place for recruiting capable people who we try and do as much of an introduction as we can ahead of them starting even the training, so they understand what they're coming into, because it is a very different environment for people to work into, not only the shift pattern but the pressure of dealing with people over the phone. So we're also putting those additional steps in to make sure that those that we do recruit in are more likely to be successful at staying finishing the course, but also then staying with us for a longer length of time because they know more what they're coming into. So we have all the plans in place, and happy to share more with you, but that's actually some of the reporting that we have to give nationally every week, and we did it yesterday and Wednesday to confirm to the national team that we are on track with the recruitment trajectory that we said we would be.
I think that's really important to note. The recruitment trajectory is detailed, I think, further in the papers in the performance report, and it's the one area where I think we are vulnerable to criticism from higher authorities, as it were. And I think we can all take assurance of the efforts we're making to recruit these key staff to our operation. And I'll ask the Workforce Committee as well just to monitor that recruitment plan going forward, but also commend the efforts that are being made by the staff. I think the plan's been realistic, and we've not made promises we feel we cannot deliver. And I think it's important we're absolutely straight with our regulators as well to make sure we deliver what we promise, not over-promise. So that's really important. So if there's no more questions on that, can I move us on to the winter plan? Now, this is a detailed plan, Emma, so I assume you're not going to go through every page.
I'm not going to. No, I'm not, Jeff.
I think we need the brief headlines. I think as a board, we need to feel assured that SECAmb is doing all it can to prepare for our, so-called winter season, although winter around this part of the world seems to start in June. But let's hear Emma's report.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, I would just pick highlights out. I think for most of us who've been in the NHS for more than 1 year know that this is an annual cycle. All trusts, all areas and regions are required to provide a winter plan. This is very much around forecasting what we think is going to happen, and understanding what additional steps we can take as individual organisations, and then more around systems and regions in terms of planning. So what we've done with the plan that you've got in front of you is we have liaised with our three ICS, 3 and 4, because it includes Frimley, although recognising we're only part of it, for Kent, Surrey, Sussex and Frimley, and we've taken into consideration also aspects of their winter plans, because all of our winter plans need to intermesh so that we're all actually talking the same language and all focusing on the same areas. It's important to note, Chair, that this is the first iteration of this document. It is a live document and will be refreshed on a regular basis. And also the document you have, whilst it has the draft plans for EOC and 111 in there, we will be developing this further, and there is an ask to all departments and all of our operating units to make sure that we have localised plans that can be incorporated in this as well. The first part of the presentation and the slides talk about the current context, about what's happening and what that means for us locally, some of which I've already talked through to you and Philip alluded to as well in his piece. The next bit is around the national planning. So each year NHS England issue a planning guidance document, and this year they gave us 5 key lines of inquiry, which again are detailed within the slides, specifically looking at some of the issues around conflicting, competing demands, ongoing issues of the pandemic, including vaccination programs, organisational recovery and learning and building on good practice. So it was very important within our plan that we took into consideration those key lines of inquiry and made sure that we addressed them. I think beyond that, we then talk about how we escalate things both internally across the ICSs and the regions. And then the final slides very much relate to high level actions that we will be taking. And when you look at them, they will mirror some of the actions we've spoken about already when you come talk about resourcing. Clearly mentioned talking about staff welfare, which is always front and centre for us as well. Capacity management, system management. This is all about working with partners to support flow, because we need to get to our patients and keep focusing on getting there in the most timely fashion as we can. Ensuring our command structure is robust. We recognise at the moment it is very live. It is having to make decisions every day, having to flex and adapt, and we need to make sure it's resilient through the winter. And then, of course, the high level actions also relate to adverse weather, because in the current climate, we may be lucky and have a mild one, but even if it's very wet, we get localised flooding that causes problems, and we have historically seen issues around snow and cold weather. So we need to be prepared for all of that. And then the final part, Chair, is just about assurance and monitoring. So this plan went through the internal governance. It has been shared with our commissioners, with our ICSs, because we are all doing this work collaboratively. It's being led by our EPRR team in terms of coordination and oversight. And as I said, will be an iterative document over the forthcoming months.
Thank you, Janine. A very comprehensive summary. Howard, first question. I think you're on mute, Howard.
Sorry. Yeah, no, thank you very much. Very, very comprehensive. I just have two questions on one subject. On the, I noticed you've got the MACA requests, some military aid requests. There's two questions on that, really, around what are the criteria or do we have specified criteria at which we would launch a MACA request? And secondly, given at least the possibility, given where we're at in REAP 4, heading headlong into a winter period, with the possibility of maybe further surge of COVID plus flu, whatever, and a cold winter, that the probability of this is at least low to moderate, I would have thought. That is there anything we can do or do in terms of doing a preparation for a MACA request? So rather than wait to do a MACA request and they say, yes, okay, we've now got to train up our drivers or whatever to do, and it's going to take another 2-3 weeks before we get them trained, whether we can almost anticipate that by getting a request for preparation that we don't actually then press the button on until we need to. But when we press the button, they are more prepared than perhaps would normally be the case. Sorry, complex question. But,
no, not at all. I think this year has been fascinating for us in working through MACAs. We've had two this year. We had one earlier on in the year that was an independent MACA we submitted through the approved route, and then we had the one in August that was unsuccessful, that was done as a group MACA request. through the NAC. I think we've had massive lessons from that, Howard. And I think one of the really good bits of learning from it is we have a very, very strong link now with our local military team, and their acronym is a JRLO, which I'm going to have to look up because I can't remember. It's a liaison officer, it's a joint regional liaison officer. I think it's that. Thank you. I'm looking at Philip. Good. Thank you. They represent all the military services, not just one of them. And the way MACA works is you don't go to them with a plan, you go to them with an issue, and then you work up a plan together. So I think the reality is, having done that twice this year now, they know what we would be looking for. We know what they would be wanting us to ask for and the way we would ask for it. I think the point you're asking is, can we think about this ahead of time? Absolutely. So everything is on the table. We are working up how we would ask for it if we would ask for it. I think learning from us has been the amalgamated request didn't work for us for a number of reasons. And I think there is something about local ownership being probably a stronger position for us to be. I think the challenge for us will be forecasting ahead of time and seeing where this is going. I think you're absolutely right when you look at those concurrence of risks, or and them all sitting on top of each other. If we add the vaccination program and the implications of that, I think we will each day be looking at the implications of this. So yes, we will have it prepped, so that when we know we need it, we also work with them to know what their lead-in time is. So now we're all a lot smarter about how each other works. I think if and when we do it next, it will be a lot slicker. I think the challenge will be, of course, they're not a bottomless resource, and the government likes to allocate them to different things. Right now, it looks like they might be driving fuel tankers. So I think there's also a real challenge here about actually how much resource is there to go around as well. So yes, we are preparing, because it would be wrong for us not to. Just to also add, we're having some really positive conversations with our fire and rescue service colleagues across the 4 areas as well, because they worked with us last time, particularly East Sussex and Kent, who I met last week, really proactive and want to do more to support us on their own in terms of responding, but also for them to consider how they could drive for us in the same ways the military does at times of need. So it's more than just military at that point.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you. So did you want to qualify on this? Anything to add on that point before I bring in Subo?
Yeah, it's a really quick qualification. Howard was asking about training in advance of a MACA request. You can't do that. The request starts from day one of training, and so you can't pre-train and then call them, because of course they get sent away to different places. So the first lot we trained aren't in the country anymore, and so that's why that doesn't work.
Duly noted. But I think just to close that item in terms of, I think it would be the board's wish, and I think Emma alluded to, there's always a degree of sensitivity in requesting additional assistance from the military into the public sector. I think the board's wish is that obviously it's for the executives to make that call, but I think from what we're saying as a board, we would absolutely support you making that call as and when you think it's appropriate. I'd ask that we put any sensitivities to one side, and the patients and staff safety are our #1 priority. So please can we put that on the record? That's the board's wish, but we will also respect your professional judgment as and when you make that request.
Thank you, Chair.
But I think it's important that we would, if the chance for help is there, we must take it. Subo.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Emma. Another really good report, and thank you for providing us with a lot of assurance there on our plans for winter. I know it's really difficult. We've got a lot of things coming at us all at once, so that's really helpful having that information. We're challenged this winter, but I wanted to give Philip and David, if he feels comfortable to do so. I know it's his first board meeting, so I didn't want to put him on the spot. So Philip, you may feel more comfortable to take the question, but it's really about our forward planning for next winter, and the reason we've brought David in really, and how that will put us in a more positive place going forward in terms of how we forecast and plan for next winter. And it's really just to let the public know, I suppose, a little bit more about the importance of David's role and how this will help us plan for these sorts of winter situations.
Thank you, Philip. Philip?
Thank you. Shall I start?
No, David is next with his hand up anyway, so I'll bring David in after you've finished, Philip.
Yeah. So yes, that's exactly why we've created this role. It's not only for winters, but it's the day-to-day planning of getting our resource allocated to the right time, not only time of year, right time of day, right time of week, etc. So those are the things, and you'll hear more from David later about the first steps in which we're taking. It is, though, as Tom was saying earlier, this isn't something that you can just by saying, right, here's the plan, do overnight, because of course the people who that Emma's talking about, who are just joining us, joined the universities 3 years ago. So that was the plan we had 3 years ago. So the plan for paramedics, at least, is largely reliant on getting the supply from the universities, but it is it's set already for the first couple of years, and then starts growing after that. David,
then I'll bring in Chris. The final question, David.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that. And so I would caution against bringing in a Spaniard just to plan for winters. It's not the best. But I think the situation, especially if we think about the winter as an example, and I was having this discussion yesterday with the local team at Paddock Wood, is our standard planning and the way it's set up now for instance, is a Thursday in December looks no different than a Thursday in July in terms of what the kind of, I think it's about the old system stuff, how it works, and especially when we think about rotations and when we think about how the contracts are set up in the budgets. I think there's a bit of work that needs to be done in that respect to acknowledge some of the seasonal variances that we see and understand how those are then weaved into the system so we can better adapt and understand where we put the hours. The analogy that I was using is low-cost carriers in the aviation sector send their aircraft to the Southern Hemisphere in the Northern Hemisphere winter, and that's how they balance the resources. So it's that type of thinking that we need to start to bring in, acknowledging that Thursdays are different across every single week of the year. There's 52 weeks and every single Thursday looks different. I guess if it's okay, I'll go to my question, Chair, that I just had for Emma. Do we get any help from the likes of the Met Office in terms of the work they do in the long-term forecasting? They're usually pretty good at telling us, probably at this point all the way to March, how wet and mild or dry and cold it's going to be in a sort of weeks, with obviously all the caveats that they can put to it, as that may help us better prepare for potential surges and potential challenges, especially in some of our road networks.
So the Met Office actually issue ongoing updates, particularly out to, I know the EPRR team, I've seen them previously as well, where they give you updates for both the short term and the longer term forecast and the potential implications. It's designed for health. So it also gives you potential implications around temperature, around air particulates and those kinds of things, because we know that certain times of year, whether it be pollen or it would be the colder air, you get different varieties of impact. I'm not aware of where it comes in here, but I think that's a really good example of additional data that we need to wrap into some of the forecasting going forwards, because I know that we know that we have situations where temperatures get above 28 degrees, you see different patterns in behaviours. And actually, if we know this is coming, we are able to see it, but not at the moment accurately quantify it. So we do take mitigating actions and we do look at putting additional resources in different places. But I think it's the evidence base that some of the work that you will now be able to help us with that will be able to quantify that in a much more robust way.
Thank you, Emma. Chris?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Emma, for your comprehensive presentation. I was just looking at some of the sort of forecast assumptions that you made in your slide, and one of those was about staff and the balance between those who are taking their annual leave and those who might be affected by sickness and so forth. Do you think we've got enough resilience there to ensure that we can meet some of the challenges ahead during winter?
I think it's a really good question, Chris. We know that on average, not everyone takes all their annual leave every year anyway, so we never hit 100% of annual leave. For whatever reason, some people just choose not to take it. and we usually hit sort of high 80s with that. We also know that, particularly related to annual leave, the central message was additional carryover for up to 2 years. So I think that does allow us for some additional resilience both this year and next year. I think the challenge for us will be how we support people to take that leave in a way that is a bit more balanced across the year for their own welfare, rather than it being big rushes at the end of the year, for example. But I think we've got some of the right mapping in place. What we need to do now is just sort of keep going with it. Make sure that I know I ask my team every time I meet with them, have you booked the rest of your leave for this year? Because we need to phase it across the year. We also do have an annual leave policy that enables us to restrict the amount of leave that's taken, particularly over the 3 weeks of Christmas. So sort of from mid-December through to just after the new year, because that's always the peak times. And we really need to keep that safe. So I think we've got good processes in place. I think the challenge is going to be, whereas historically we would have just looked at annual leave and then just looked at sickness, we have a number of other things that are contributing to abstractions at this point, or staff not in work and doing clinical shifts or being in the control rooms. And I think it's the summation of all of that. And in fact, we talked about this on Wednesday at execs. It's that we are seeing greater activity in areas that we wouldn't historically have seen. And it's all of this. It may only be small amounts, but we all know that lots of small amounts add up to big amounts. And that's part of the challenge. We're seeing, for example, an increase in short notice absences for carers leave because people are now more reliant at looking after each other, generally and kids are back at school. So we're also seeing lots more of the sniffles and colds going out there. But of course, knowing that it could be COVID, you have to handle it in a slightly different way. So we're seeing an increase in short notice sickness from that point of view. We've also, need to recognise at the moment we're not training our staff to the same level that we had done historically, because we haven't got the capacity at the moment to do as much of that as we would like to do, and we should be doing. So I think that's also the challenge for us, is we may have some resilience here and now, but here and now for what we're trying to do here and now, rather than how do we maintain some resilience and do more of what we need to do going forwards.
Thank you. And very final question from Tom.
Thanks very much. And Emma, this is a great piece of work. Thank you. So under capacity management, communications plan. So obviously, this is something that's going to be vital. We're not always clear about how any health comms changes patient behaviour, of course. But I just wondered, between yourself and Janine, whether we might get a sense of what we're planning this year in terms of external comms to our populations, to attempt to not change behaviour, because obviously people who really need us, we want to hear from, we will respond to them. But this wider thing about how people place demand on the health services during very, very, very busy periods. Is that a coherent question?
It is a coherent question, and I'm sure Janine will jump in. I know that so comms, when we've been talking about it, has often been in conjunction with other partners, so that we've got messages across systems and areas. So Janine, I don't know if you want to jump in with anything specific around winter. I mean, it's still early for some of this, because this is obviously our first plan, Tom, and it will evolve, as we said. But Janine?
So we always develop a winter comms plan, Tom. Every year, which sits alongside, and I guess is part of the Trust Winter Plan, that is shared with all our partners. I'd be happy to share with the board, so everyone can be appraised of that. That uses a range of options. Obviously, we'll work with any national campaigns. As I say, I am unclear at the moment what the national approach is, but I'm sure there will be one. I hope there is. It highlights key dates for us over the winter period. So dates one would expect around sort of bank holidays and things, but other key dates that we know historically cause us issues. Our plan this year, for example, will look to target Mondays particularly. We know that Mondays have become a really busy day for us, increasingly. So we'll be looking to target Mondays. We will be working with our partners to point to alternatives. There's some good work going on with some of our systems around really working to promote pharmacies, for example. Some ambiguity around the provision of minor injuries units, which is a bit concerning. It's not a standard picture. I think probably more than ever this year, our winter plan will need to operate at two levels. So at a trust level, but will also need to operate at a more local level because of the differences in issues and availability of services. We haven't particularly had the capacity to do as much of that in the past that we would have wanted to, but I think this year, from speaking to some of them as OUMs and some of our system partners, the challenges are going to be quite different across our patch this winter, so we're going to need to tailor our response to that. But yes, more than happy to share that, Tom, and take any input from anybody around that.
Well, I think Tom's comment reflects the importance of obviously a sort of a turbo boost to our communications over the coming months, given the pressures that we face. So if the board can be cited on the plan, that would be really
more
helpful.
than happy to share, David.
Thank you,
yes,
Janine.
and Chair, just to say, Janine's point about the local approach, that granularity sounds a very sensible thing to do, in my view.
Yes, as much as we're able to do, Tom, she says slightly nervously, because there are areas within our patch we won't be able to go down, probably as far as we'd like to in terms of granularity. But I think the differences will be quite stark between different parts of our patch. The acute provision is different. Where I live, we don't have a local hospital, particularly an obvious one, but we're equidistant from 3 or 4. So, we need to flex our approach a bit, I think, to take account of that.
And perhaps I could ask that we also have our governor and our wider membership, so perhaps we can sort of target some of the information via our governors and membership as well, because they are a valuable source of local community input into our plans. And we've also got our extensive volunteer support as well. So they're also, again, tend to be community leaders who will circulate. Laurie, is this you see your hands up coming up? Is this a quick point?
Yeah, I just wanted to say to Janine's point, really, that this is something that ICSs should be dealing with. This is a whole system. We're part of a supply chain here. And I presume, Janine, that comms people at ICS level, you're talking to and influencing them. But your point about local responses means that it's not just an ICS issue, that it's also what is called place, but acute pump issue that they need to be addressing as well. So I think that's very much, and we should be asking our ICSs to be supporting us in this too.
And very much, Laurie, they all are developing their own winter plans, which we are part of and feeding in. However, I don't think we can rely on that to do everything we want it to do for us as a trust. I'm afraid we are still a marginal part in terms of comms effort anyway, of the wider ICS effort, unless they particularly need us at any time. So that doesn't negate the need in any way for us to have our own plan and approach, but we are very much part of those broader discussions already and feeding into their plans too.
It's interesting. Thank you, Jenny.
Effectively, we are part of the ICS. The ICS do not have any particular sophisticated infrastructure at the moment, and they're still making the appointments. So I think we've got to recognise we've got to make sure we take responsibility as well and don't hold back. But in summary, I think on behalf of the board, accept the winter plan. I think we are assured by its detail and that we're doing all we can to plan for what we hope will be a calm winter, but we feel like we're into it already. And but we say commend the plan, and with the added proviso that the active encouragement for the board, if we are finding ourselves in difficulty, is to look for external support from the military if required, because clearly recognising there's a shortage of military personnel as well, and we will be in a queue, no doubt. But if needs be, let's get our request in early. So thank you for that. Can I move us on now to the integrated performance report? I think, Philip, you're going to introduce this.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I'm not going to repeat what I've said in my intro in the report. I'll take that as read. So I think what I'm going the point is that we do get good feedback on the IPR, and we do try and act on it. And there's new bits every time that we produce it. So don't get but don't get tired of sending us feedback, because actually it's the sort of document that needs to exist. So there's new bits here. For example, there's some tracking bits on the ClinEd bit for the first time, which is good. But I'll leave others to go through it. But so we're going to start going through it with Emma. I know we've had a lot of Emma over the last half an hour, but let's have a little bit more, and it'll take us through the operations section.
Always worth listening to. So Emma to start, then David.
Thank you. And I will be brief, Chair, because a number of the exceptions that are identified in here are items that we've discussed before. There are just a couple of things that I would like to pull out from the thing. I think the ambulance validation, we talked about it earlier on in terms of the pilot for 999 Cat 3 and 4. Within the exception reports here of highlights is the 111 validation of Cat 3 and 4. This is we are consistently towards the top of the pile nationally for this, maintaining around 95% in terms of revalidation, which is a really high proportion, which again supports then making sure that the patients get the right outcome. So those that need to come through to the 9s for an attendance by an ambulance, they get that, but otherwise they get the right care and right direction for onward care elsewhere. So I think that's a really positive report here. Second thing from me is around CFRs. We are seeing an increase in the proportion of and the contribution of CFRs to C1 performance. It's still small, but every second counts, and with them getting on scene often between 2 to 3% of the time as the first response. So just I would like to do some recognition here of the CFRs, the work they're doing to increase their numbers, knowing also that community first responders, knowing that they are doing some revalidation of their training at the moment to because we've had a real overwhelming response to people wanting to join our CFR team. So just wanted to get that recognised. And then a third point, which is about meal breaks. It is in here. We are still maintaining a high proportion of meal breaks. Very few crews don't get meal breaks, usually less than 2%. We recognise that due to the current challenges, whether it be performance because people are travelling further, or ironically, of course, in the last couple of days, where we have been trying to use less fuel to move people around and not run everyone back and forth, people are needing to take their breaks off their base station more often. They do have access to ambulance community response posts, ACRPs, and we have a wealth of estate around where people can take breaks as appropriate. So we are getting staff on their breaks because that's really important across their day. So just wanted to note those three things that are within the report, Chair, in terms of highlights. The exceptions from an ops point of view are very much around hours produced and performance, which if you're happy with that, I won't elaborate any further on at this point.
Thank you. David, do you want to come on to, I think you were down next to speak on the reports.
Thank you, Chair.
I think questions.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting, it falls on from the discussion we've just had about getting the right resources in the right hours, and just updating the board and members of the public on some of the work that's been going on over the summer, where we have a new forecast. And one of the initial insights we've been able to see out of the newly formed performance cell is that the pattern of demand over the day has shifted, and the mornings seem to be busier than they used to be. The consequence of that is obviously when you think about rosters and all of the supply chain that we have built around meeting that demand is currently evening skewed. So there's an exercise that we're going through to update that. The rollout to all of our operating units happened over August and early September. So over the course of October, what we will see, because of 6-week leading planning, is we're going to see some of those rosters start to adapt to meet that early morning demand much better than they have historically. And this is a change in demand pattern that we've seen coming out of COVID. And and we're still doing the work to understand exactly what has led to that shift in demand throughout the hours of the day. Now, the thing that is important to remember here is that it will take a little bit of time to work with colleagues to shift our infrastructure to the morning. But as I said, we should be seeing some of those improvements happen, as a result. Now, there's still going to be a shortage in the overall hours that we can produce, but hopefully this exercise will mean that we are allocating the hours more efficiently to meet an early peak demand, which hopefully sets us up better for the rest of the day. I think that is the update at this stage. I'll take any questions.
Thank you. I think, David, I think the board will be very encouraged to hear that the executive with our staff are taking a more scientific approach, as it were, towards the allocation of resources. So I think that's really good to hear. Can I just check we are doing that in partnership with our staff and their organisation and their representatives?
Yes,
yeah, 100%.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Colleagues, before we bring in Howard to talk about the performance committee, is there anything you wish to, in terms of the reports you've heard from Emma and David, is there any questions from members of the board regarding our performance, current performance at all? Michael?
I take this comment in the spirit it's meant. It does bring home when you look at the national benchmarking, and I know this was for August, how we are a significant outlier on 999 response to call answering time. I know we are doing everything possible to remedy this situation, but I would go on record as saying it is of concern, and I think we need to be very well focused on this. It is closely linked to how we respond in the winter period. We need to improve, but I know people are doing everything, but I think it is important members of the public know that the whole board is very much focused on this, Chair.
Thank you for bringing that up, Michael. That's a very important point. Emma, do you, any response we can make?
I think it's a really fair observation from Michael. I think our call answering performance is one of the biggest challenges we've got at present. We know that there are a multitude of factors involved in it. All I can assure you is that in the last week or so, as we've beginning to see some of those abstractions come down and some people come through, we've noticed some improvement in call answering performance even in the last few days. So I think that it will start to improve. I think the challenge for us was over the last 6 to 8 weeks is really trying to understand what more we could have done beyond what we had done to try and improve it, which is always the challenge. Duplicate calls are still running at about 26%. However, even during calm times, they still run at sort of north of 20%. So it's still higher numbers. The other thing I think I'd just like to note, Chair, is that we are working nationally around call handling. And by that, we have buddy sites. So those are sites that we are allocated to across all the ambulance services, so that if we are struggling, we are able to reach out to them and say, can you give us a hand and take some calls for a period of time? So we have nominated buddy sites. I think it's important to note that over the last 6 weeks, with the challenges everyone's had, those buddy sites have failed, mainly because our buddies have been unable to assist us with taking additional calls. So it's not the process, it's just the overall pressure across the system. This has also challenged BT. So BT are obviously that's British Telecom, are the provider of who do the first port of contact for all 999 calls. And what they are reporting is the overwhelming increase in the calls across all ambulance services are having an impact on their ability to manage flow as well. So they are proposing some mitigating action. So I absolutely recognise Michael's position. I think it is our position that we absolutely recognise where we are in the table and the impact of that on our patients and the welfare of those patients. We are taking additional steps, and I do expect, Chair, at the next board, and I know that we've got the next performance committee. I think it's in a few weeks' time. We will be able to provide an improving position, I expect, at that time.
Thank you. I think it's important that as a board we recognise that this is probably our number one current risk in terms of provision of service to the public. I think we can take some assurance from the efforts that are being made to recruit additional staff and to train them appropriately, and to look at the flexibility between our call handlers in 111 and 999, and our work is going on as well to have a more flexible workforce. I think it's important that the board do note that all the efforts that are being made, and we look forward to further reports on that, because I think it's important. Right, let's. Howard, would you like to introduce the summary of the Performance Committee's deliberations, please?
Yes, Chair. So this was the first meeting of the new Performance Committee on the 19th of August. One of the main items we started with was the terms of reference and cycle of business, which we agreed. In terms of the rest of the content, we've sort of covered a huge amount already at the board, and Emma's gone through a lot of detail in the so far. So I wasn't planning to repeat that. So covering off the 4.3 million extra funding and the national position. So all I can say was we had a very good quality of debate and discussion around performance. And we will be looking to continue that and look at slightly more granular level of analysis in terms of the geography. But a good meeting, and I've set out there what we covered.
Howard, thank you, and thank you for your leadership of that important committee. And I think it brings across to hopefully to those listening to the meeting this morning, the focus the board is giving to performance. It cannot be separated, of course, from quality or from financial resources, but nevertheless it does benefit from a more laser-like focus as appropriate. So thank you for the work you started there. So thank you for that. Can I move us on to if we may, any questions at all on further questions? We've concluded on the performance and the performance committee. We can take assurance to the board that the matter is getting appropriate attention, and we look forward to that being further monitored over the coming months. So we can move on to the important matters of quality and patient safety. I think, Fiona, you're going to talk us into this, then followed by Bethan, and the highlight by exception in the reports.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good morning, everybody. I've just got 3 areas that I'd like to highlight from my sections of the IPR. Firstly, around the ambulance quality indicators, we saw improved survival figures for out-of-hospital cardiac arrest in May for the survival and June for ROSC. That's very pleasing, but the numbers are very small and they tend to bounce around quite a lot month by month. So I don't tend to put a great deal of significance on that, but it is nice to see. We saw improved compliance around both the stroke and the sepsis AQIs. But there is still more work to do on the STEMI compliance. That's ST elevation myocardial infarction or a particular sort of heart attack. As Philip said, we've introduced 3 new metrics relating to clinical education. 2 of those are around the course capacity utilisation, both on the AAP course at Crawley College and for our transition to practice, which is the newly qualified paramedics coming from university and starting work with us operationally. And pleasingly, the number of students at risk of not completing their courses has reduced. And then finally, EMA pathways audit compliance. The lower figure that we saw in July is because these staff were supporting call handling. And as we've just heard, that's one of our biggest areas of risk. So it's a balance of risk. We do need to complete audits to maintain our pathways license, but the immediate risk at the moment is about not being able to pick up the phone. The retrospective audits do continue and live auditing will recommence in October. And I'm pleased to say that the secondments that have been very long term within that team have now been substantiated, which is very positive for the team and for EOC audit. And happy to take any questions on that.
Thank you. If I could ask Bethan to feed the report, then we'll take questions of you both. So Bethan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So same as Fiona, just a couple of exceptions. I won't comment on, if it's all right, Chair, on the freedom to speak up or the whistleblowing elements, because we have Kim Blakeburn, our freedom to speak up guardian, joining us. So I would just propose, if anybody has any questions around those two metrics, maybe just defer them till Kim joins us. Just to say that first. The only two things I was just going to flag were around complaints, both of them around complaints. Firstly, and there is an exception report in there, that our complaints reporting timelines have increased slightly. We've taken the decision as an executive team to move our internal target. It is an internally governed target. There's no nationally mandated target for complaints response, although typically the NHS have an agreed 25-day response time. In the first wave of COVID, we extended it to 35 days, and we have done that again. That's for a variety of reasons, but the two main ones being the increase in the number of complaints, but also the fact that our patient experience team are now having to not just respond to the complaints and pull them together, but investigate them, so that we can ensure that frontline staff are not investigating them as much as they were, so that they can be in REAP 4 out working on the road frontline as much as possible. And that includes our OTL, our operational team leader cohort. So that's the reason it is now taking a bit longer, but both of those. But we've got the response times in there. We're not wildly away from our new target, but just wanted to be open and transparent about that. The second element around complaints is an increase that we're seeing in the proportion of complaints relating to crew attitude. This is something that's being seen across the sector, and I think it's multifactorial, as you'll see from the exception report there. Not all of these are being upheld. I think that's really important to say. And these are really difficult sometimes because it's about perception, and sometimes there isn't a right or a wrong or upheld or not upheld. It's how somebody has felt. But we've got two key work streams that we hope will help with this, as well as clearly the workload that our staff are having to see. The other things that we're looking at are Ali is leading a piece of work around acceptable behaviour at work, and that's for a number of facets included in that, but clearly behaviour and attitude is one of them. And we also, through work that Emma, Fiona and I are involved with, and through our counterparts around clinical supervision and helping staff from that perspective. So I think they were the key things from me, Chairman.
Thank you, Dean. And I think it is always a pressure point, this, isn't it, in terms of the staff attitude, when the first thing when particularly with the time we're taking to attend certain calls, and they're immediately met with a hostile reception from angry members of the public, and that's why our response time, both in terms of answering the phone, but as quick as we can get help to people, is going to be partly will diffuse this. We also must support our staff when they do come across inappropriate behaviour as well. So it's a very fine line to walk. Michael.
Yeah, very quickly. Thank you, Fiona and Bethan. Very clear reports as ever. Just two questions for me around assurance. One is, we're inevitably looking back. We hear a lot about that we can't provide all our people with the training that we would like to do. Just some assurance that from a medical quality perspective, we're not building up a problem for the future in terms of our people not having the right level of training. And my second point really relates to some of the things that Bethan said, particularly for category 3 and 4 patients. Are we confident that the patient experience is what we would want it to be? Because I think there's a difference between quality of care and actually how the patients perceive the level of service that they provide for SECAmb. Thank you.
Do you want me to pick that up and then go to Fiona, David, if that's right?
Please, yeah.
So I'll start with your second point, Michael, and this is something we discussed at QPS 2 weeks ago around patient experience. So we were saying that whilst we're not in a lot of the cases, particularly the category 3s and 4s, finding harm, physical harm, I remember clearly Tammy, who was presenting the paper on harm, saying very succinctly, but if we were measuring patient experience, all of these would be serious incidents, if that was a measure. So yes, I agree, there is a massive patient experience element, because if you've asked any of the patients who've waited extended periods of times in those categories, clearly that's not very good patient experience. And then it goes on to David's earlier point of then our crews are picking up the brunt of that and when they arrive. But no, and this was also the focus of the patient experience group who met two weeks ago as well, looking at what we can do to help with this messaging and the issues we have. But no, it's a really major issue. So it's not about the physical harm, but the patient experience is poor when they've waited an extended period. On your question around key skills, Fiona is probably better placed to answer around the clinical risk. All I would say is, for me, it's a balance of risk. It's the balance of risk at the moment between getting to our patients so that we can ensure the best clinical outcome versus learning from previous incidences that we are not managing to do in its entirety at the moment, while we can't undertake key skills as we'd like to do. But Fiona is probably far better placed to answer that.
Fiona?
Thank you. So, Michael, I can't give you that complete assurance at this point in time. I think we did as well as we could in the last year in delivering over 50% of our key skills. And we had hoped to restart that programme on the 20th of September. But where we are operationally at the moment and the risks that patients run, I think to have additional abstractions would just not be reasonable. So we are looking to see when we can safely restart that programme, or if there are ways that we can mitigate against the face-to-face abstractions that we have historically used to deliver key skills. So it's very much on the radar, but it's just a balance, as Bethan has said, it's very much a balance of risks at this point in time.
Thank you very much, and I very much support, the importance of delivering of those skills. So thank you for that. Very clear answers.
Yeah, thank you, Subo.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Fiona and Bethan, for your update on that. That's really helpful. It's a smaller question, I suppose, but given how important the Pathways course is to us, I noticed that the 20% are not passing these courses. Is that what you would expect? Is that sort of normal? And if it's not, is there a particular reason for it? And is there something we can do to up that pass rate? Because I know it affects directly the number of people that we can have helping on the clinical advice centre.
Express to answer, Fiona.
So I'll start off, but probably then hand over to Emma. So yes, I think we have always recognised that the attrition during the training for EMA is quite high, and for that reason we have been over-recruiting to the courses to try and ensure that the number coming out trained does not fall too catastrophically. I think we just have to recognise that this is an area where people come into the ambulance service thinking that it's something that they really like to do, but when they get into the weeds of exactly what call handling is all about, it's not for everybody. Emma, I don't know if there's anything that you'd wish to add to that.
I think you've covered most of it, Fiona. I think it loops back to the point I made earlier on, where we're trying to get people in as best we can to have a bit of experience it, a little bit of a come and see before you join. I think we've also tried to looking at how we can even more make our recruitment process more robust, so that they are not only do they know what they come into, but with the right temperament, the right understanding, because it takes it's about people's values and people's motivations and their resilience in a tough environment. So I think we have seen some higher turnover of some of those courses. I think, Subo, we've also had some courses where we've lost almost no one, so it's also been a little bit inconsistent. I think we're in a better place now. I do think also I would like to note that the extraordinary amount of work that has been delivered by the training teams to do this, those both for those, or we're talking about call handlers, but let's not forget our clinicians have to do the same course when they come in initially, and they're supported by the clinical team, and there's additional training for PACS. Which I'll put the acronym into the chat, which is the new clinical decision support software that allows clinicians to use their knowledge and skills much more in terms of how they support those patients. So there's a range of training that is going on to not only bring more people in, but to ensure that they are current and up to date on everything. And the final thing for me is we also need to recognise Pathways goes through about 3 iterations a year at least. In fact, I think Fiona and I had an email conversation last week. Version 30, I think we said, it comes in after Christmas. And you know, it's been in for a number of years, but it's about 3 iterations a year that they have to go through, and everyone needs to have a refresh. So there's an awful lot of this that continues as well to ensure that everyone is current and is using Pathways as efficiently as possible.
Thank you. Number of questions sort of backing up. Can I take Liz Sharp next, then Tom? Liz?
Thanks, Chairman.
Good morning.
Just some assurance for me, I think, in terms of pushing out our complaints response time, but also, you know, delaying our training. I'm very aware we're working towards our Care Quality Commission readiness and inspection for next year, and I wonder if there are time limits to these metrics, because we do need to achieve those certain response times and our main mandatory training at over 85% to ensure we retain our good to outstanding rating.
Thanks, Liz. Bethan, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Liz. And so the CQC will differentiate between mandatory training and key skills. They won't view key skills, and I put it very deliberately as the CQC won't view key skills rather than me. They won't view key skills as mandatory. They will review they will regard the online things such as health and safety, etc., as the mandatory element. And for us, that isn't so much of an issue as the key clinical skills. I think the bigger risk for us, though, is the clinical skills and training following learning from incidents and issues. CQC are aware of our current stance. We're open and transparent with them about it. Emma, in fact, presented to the CQC, didn't you, Emma, about 6-8 weeks ago, very detailed. So they are aware of our stance, but I agree there has to be an end date because they have to know that we've got a point in time where that will come. In terms of complaints, that target, we're held against our own target. So if our target is 35 days, we'll be held against 35 days. So I think as long as we are astute enough to have that balance of risk and make our target achievable, then they will be accepting of that, and they also know we've extended that. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but I agree we need an end date for the training element, and that's something that Philip's got his hand up anyway. He might want to comment on, because it's a wicked problem that we go around every week at execs.
It is. We'll pick that up in QPS as well, I'm sure. But I think you're listening to staff this week. I mean, clearly the key skills are a major, one of the key things which our staff look forward to, that key skills training. And so I think the summary of thoughts is that probably we need to maybe take some measured risk here to find different ways of delivering some of these programs, or look at the mandatory and other elements of our training to say, look, is there something we can suspend for a year in order to get our staff to do the most important elements of key skills, or some other training, just perhaps a flexible approach. We're hearing from some of your staff, Emma, in the week I was, about, you know, people coming up with different ideas how to organise things. And I think all I ask is, can we keep listening to our staff on this as well, because it's a major morale issue. Philip, can you want to comment on this? And I've got other questions we need to get to.
If I'm honest, Chair, it's probably been said by now, and my hand was up for an earlier question, but the time's passed.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Chair. So back to Fiona's report, and really back to the STEMI and the ROSC issues. First of all, on ROSC, I absolutely endorse Fiona's comment about how difficult it is to make meaningful comparisons around return to spontaneous circulation with the sort of data that we have. But clearly it's an area where we're going to have to explore improvement. My question to Fiona is about STEMI. So we've had for quite some time the STEMI Care Bundle performance, as reported here, not where we want it to be. Is it continuing to be one element of the bundle? Is it still the pain relief?
Yes, Tom, it is. It's still the pain relief. The documentation of pain scores is much improved now, and that happened when we introduced the EPCR, the Electronic Patient Care Record. But we still do have issues around pain relief, around non-registrant crews and not having access to morphine, although they do have access to nitrous oxide, to Entonox, and the fact that paracetamol tends to be used, and that currently does not tick the right boxes in terms of what you are required to do to score points for the AQIs. That, I believe, is going to change.
Yes, that's going to need a national solution, isn't it? So we may come back to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions relating to this item? I think we seem to be clear. I can't see other hands raised. So in summary, just in terms of quality and safety, before let's actually take your report first, Tom, then I'll summarise the whole section on patient safety. So report from the QPS report, please.
Thank you, Chair. So we met last on the 16th of September, and we've changed the way that we work. And you'll see in the paper that we've moved now to having a dashboard to help us focus in on the important issues and having a more focused agenda, so that we have a more detailed, meaningful discussion about the key issues. A new innovation for this committee is the executive escalation. So Fiona and Bethan will bring escalations to this to QPS on matters that aren't necessarily on the agenda, but that we need to know about, get early warning about, get briefed on. So that I found it very, very helpful. In terms of the main issues you'll see in the paper, EOC 111, and we've had already a discussion about PACS and quality assurance, and we were partially assured around EOC 111 clinical safety, but there is still the issue of the what I would say is the bumpy journey of rollout of the PACS training. So that is continuing, and we have asked for a trajectory and some timescales, and we will monitor that going forward at committee. In harm reviews, we were assured, and obviously this is such a sensitive issue because no one comes to work to be associated with harm, and we are seeing potential harm to patients because of delay, particularly around C1 now, and we've discussed that in earlier parts of this meeting. And whilst we're not seeing evidence of actual patient harm on the increase, and we were assured about that, the issue of patient experience came to the fore, and Bethan's already mentioned that Tammy reported this. And we really want to get a grip as a committee on the experience of our patients as we're in the circumstances in which we find ourselves. So we've asked for more detail on patient experience for future committee, and obviously we'll report that back to the board. Serious incidents, number of things here really, and we recognise that if you like, the moral burden on staff who are responsible for identifying, managing, reporting on, investigating serious incidents, because these can be quite distressing, and we need to look after our own people in that, and we just want to say here that we recognise those of you who are involved in investigating and managing serious incidents, the toll it has on you. In terms of key skills, well, we've just had a discussion about this key skills issue, so I won't retread that, but we were mindful of that. It came up at committee, and this balance between maintaining our performance and maintaining patient safety, it's a very fine balance, and clearly the executive are mindful of that. We had a report from Emma about public access defibrillators, and this is an ongoing issue which is quite challenging to resolve. The defibrillators in public places that the trust own and are directly responsible for getting a handle on whether they are ready for use in an emergency, and that we can be assured on that. We're not assured on that yet. And then the wider issue of all the other defibrillators out there across our region that we may not be aware of, but clearly if we're called to a patient in cardiac arrest and such a device is available and not ready for use, not safe, that places patients at risk. So we've asked for a further update on that from Emma and team, and we will keep an eye on that. that's my report. Thank you.
Thank you. I think in summary, I think this is an important section of the meeting. Just to quickly summarise, I think what we're hearing is openness and honesty regarding our current predicament in providing a service to the patients. I think the board can be assured of the efforts of our staff, even though there may be some issues to do with occasionally issues to do with crew attitude. Overall, I think we can be assured of the significant efforts our staff are currently taking to keep our patients safe, and we commend the efforts that they're taking. We've had plenty of evidence of the work and the pressure which they're currently working under. But I think also we're being realistic as well, that in some cases we're not always meeting the demands of the public because of that pressure, but we are trying to manage that risk in the best way we can. And again, through QPS and the excellent summaries we're getting from Bethan and her team, we are well aware of the serious untoward incident risk. We're monitoring that carefully, and we are keeping those harm reviews under careful review as a board. So whilst it remains very difficult, I think this is an important section for the board to transact this business. We are doing all we can currently within available resources to manage a significant workload and keep as many patients safe as we possibly can. So I think that will be, hopefully the board concur with my summary, and please add anything if you wish. But our eyes remain open though to risk. So Philip, is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, Chair, if I may, I just wanted to record for the minutes that we've said it, but I wanted to sort of finish this item off on it, to understand and applaud the efforts of our staff in what are very difficult circumstances, not just the road crews who are meeting people who are agitated, but very significantly in our call centres, the EOC and the 111 call centre, who are taking similar levels of unhappiness and having to deal with really difficult conversations every day at the moment, and they're doing so brilliantly. Occasionally things go wrong, but 99 times out of 100, people are doing the right thing for the right reason.
No, I think I can speak for the board and say we absolutely support those comments, Philip. Thank you. Colleagues, although we are behind time, we have been transacting important business. I'm not sure about you, but I certainly need a break. So can I suggest we reconvene at 12:25 to allow you to be reinvigorated for a speedy conclusion to the rest of the board business? Okay, thank you.